Numbers. I hated them in math and have mixed feelings about them in the Bible. What follows are my initial thoughts and reactions to this book of the Bible. I have not done any outside research regarding the more challenging or problematic passages of Christian scripture. Therefore, do not take whatever criticisms I may make in this video as my final word on the passage or verse in question. I am very likely going to be doing a Bible Revisited series addressing my different issues with the Bible, book by book, after conducting ample outside research. So now, without further ado, let's jump into the review. So the book of Numbers was written by Moses, and it basically tells the story of how the Israelites prepared to enter the Promised Land, and how they sinned and were punished, and how they prepared to try again. It is a part of the Old Testament, and I guess my overall thoughts on Numbers is, I don't know, I'm conflicted, but I overall enjoyed Numbers. I gotta say, like, there are parts of Numbers that you can totally skip over because it's just Numbers. It's called Numbers for a reason, because there are so many lists of just, this tribe had so many members, this tribe did so many things, you know, it's just, large portions of this book are just statistics that don't mean anything today. I've definitely found the actual story of Numbers interesting whenever it actually talked about the day-to-day activities of the Israelites, the struggles, the conflicts, all that stuff, and the moral, the miracles and the moral lessons that you can learn from all of that stuff. I definitely enjoyed that part, but I will say there's also a whole bunch of like ceremony stuff and traditions that no one practices at all anymore, which are interesting to read, but as you know, they're just not relevant to today. But yeah, overall, I really liked Numbers. There definitely are some things in the book of Numbers that are troubling to me. It's not, there are some things that are very, very troubling to me, but there are also parts of the book of Numbers that are amazing and awe-inspiring and incredibly beautiful, and we're going to discuss all of them. So, ladies and gentlemen, since I've kind of given you my overall thoughts and feelings about the book of Numbers, just you know, a short little review. Now let's jump into the actual analysis and discussion part of this review on the specific passages and verses in the book of Numbers that I found compelling, interesting, troubling, etc. First, I would like to talk about Numbers chapter 5, verse 5 through 7. The Lord said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, when a man or woman wrongs another in any way and so is unfaithful to the Lord, that person is guilty and must confess the sin he has committed. He must make full restitution for his wrong, add 1/5 to it, and give it all to the person he has wronged." What I like so much about these verses is I just think it's a great concept of almost like you wrong somebody and you not only pay them back, but you also you do them almost like an extra favor. You don't just settle it by, oh, I hit you in the face, you get to hit me in the face. Instead, you allow them to hit you in the face twice. No, that's a horrible analogy, but I think you get the point. It's basically you go above and beyond to make restitution for your wrongs, and I really like that. Now, the next passage I would like to talk about in the book of Numbers is Numbers chapter 5, verses 11 through 31. The only reason I point out this passage, this is all having to do with testing to see if a woman has been unfaithful to her husband. Now, you know, I don't know exactly, you know, what is meant here by bitter water, but all I will say is that kind of the test to see if a woman has been unfaithful to her husband, it's kind of weird because it's dependent on her drinking this bitter water, and basically if she survives and is okay and doesn't get horribly sick, then hey, she was faithful to her husband, and that's great. But if she drinks the water and her thighs swell up and her body wastes away, then she clearly has been unfaithful to her husband. My question is, when it says bitter water, is that just bad water? And if then it's like, I guess, you know, people would say, well, God decides here. It has nothing to do with germs, but I don't know. From the 21st century looking back here, I'm almost thinking that there were a lot of women that had not been unfaithful to their husbands, but that drank bitter water and just got violently ill and were incorrectly charged with being unfaithful. I guess, that's what a skeptic would say about this passage. I just wanted to point that out because I'm like, they didn't know what they didn't know they didn't have an understanding of sanitary water back then, clean water, and so they just took, if you just give someone dirty water, there's a good chance they might get sick, and it may have nothing to do with whether they were faithful or unfaithful to their spouse. Now, one of the things I really appreciate about the book of Numbers, and pretty much a lot of the Old Testament, is it really shows how ungrateful humans are. Whenever we're given something, we never are content with it. We always want to find a reason to complain. I mean, just look around in America. People are making up problems to be upset about, and it's insane. Like, we just always, whether it's the Israelites, the Jews, or any people group, we always complain and find a reason to be upset and unhappy with our circumstances. We are never content. And so Numbers chapter 11 verses 4 through 35 is a great example of that. I recommend that you read that passage. Obviously, I'm not going to read it because it's quite a long passage, but it's basically the Israelites are saying, why are you giving us this free food from the sky, manna? We hate it. It's disgusting. Why don't you give us meat? What's your problem, God? Basically, they're complaining, and God's like, okay, well, I will give you meat. In fact, I'm going to give you so much meat that you're going to hate me. And so he does. And then he's also a little annoyed, and so he strikes him with severe plague. It's basically the point of this passage, I almost think, is just be content with what you have and don't demand too much. Like, if you just have patience. Meat will come later. It always does. I don't know what I mean by that statement, but I think we're good enough to move on from this passage. And going along with the last passage, I would just want to highlight Numbers chapter 14, verse 11, which reads, "How long?" And this is God speaking. "How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me, in spite of all the miraculous signs I have performed among them?" I find myself doubting the Bible all the time. Sometimes, some days I'm extremely confident. Some days I am not confident at all that it's true. And sometimes I feel bad about that because I live in America and I have everything someone could possibly have. And yes, of course, there are good questions and good reasons to be skeptical and all of that. And I am skeptical, and that's part of the reason I'm doing this, because I want to find out if I actually believe in this book. But I will say, though, there is something to be said for how people who are even living in prosperity, or they're given everything that they require, still complain at the end of the day that they don't have enough, therefore God must not care about them, or God must not exist. It's all, I don't know, it's just the way people are. And God is expressing some serious rage here whenever he says all this. Some righteous indignation, you might say. Now, Numbers chapter 15, verses 32 to 36 is a passage I'm kind of conflicted about. I'm going to read it because it almost, I know you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like a direct contradiction of what Jesus said in the New Testament. It reads, "While the Israelites were in the desert, a man was found gathering wood on the Sabbath day. Those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moses and Aaron and the whole assembly, and they kept him in custody, because it was not clear what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, 'The man must die. The whole assembly must stone him outside the camp.' So the assembly took him outside the camp and stoned him to death, as the Lord commanded Moses." My problem with this passage is that Jesus in the New Testament basically said the Sabbath is great, and you ought to observe it for your own good, but the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Something along those lines. And the reason he said all this stuff is because the Pharisees they had captured somebody who, I can't remember if it was one of the disciples or who was gathering a little bit of wheat or something to eat in the fields. And they said, "This man is working, he must be stoned," right? And Jesus said, "No." Here, a man is just gathering wood. So there's that slight difference, but it seems like a contradiction. In the New Testament, Jesus is like, hey, it's no big deal. You're just gathering a little something for yourself. It doesn't matter. But here it's saying, no, it does matter. In fact, you should be stoned to death. Now, in my Life Application Bible, it says that perhaps the guy was trying to get ahead of everyone else, working, gathering wood, getting ahead of everyone else while everyone was. And that may be the truth. Maybe the person was working. Maybe the person was being selfish and deceitful, and using the Sabbath as a time to work while everyone else was not working to get ahead of them. Maybe that is true. My problem is that is not what is said here. And so you have to make up the whole idea. That passage is a problematic passage for me. If anyone has an explanation for why it's not problematic, leave that explanation in the comments section below. Now on to Numbers chapter 16. I'm not going to read anything from it, but that chapter is crazy. Israelites are rebelling. There's Levites are vying for power when they really shouldn't be. They're testing whether or not Moses even has authority over them. God literally forces some leaders to be swallowed up by the earth and die, and then he cast fire on some people. I don't really have any necessarily a moral statement to make about the chapter. All I'm going to say is that it would just be a really cool scene in a movie. Another passage I find extremely interesting is Numbers chapter 20, verses 9 to 13. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." These were the waters of Meribah, where the Israelites quarreled with the Lord and where he showed himself holy among them. The reason I point this passage out is at first I was like, what? Wait, so you're going to penalize Moses and Aaron and all the community and because of making water come out of a rock? But if you read between the lines, you realize that Moses does not include God when he says, "Must we bring you water out of this rock?" And he strikes the rock twice, because the first time, God was like, "What? No." And then the second time he's just like, "Okay, I'll show my power." But then God is like, "You know what? You did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites. You will not bring this community into the land I give them." It's a good lesson in don't take credit for for power that you do not actually own. And that can be applied to anything, but it almost goes along with the whole idea of don't take the Lord's name in vain. I know the Lord's name is not used here, but precisely because it's not used here, that is the problem. Moses did not give credit where credit was due. He plagiarized holy power. Now, in the same chapter, verses 22 to 29 describes Aaron, his death, and I found it pretty interesting because it says here basically Aaron is he dies because he will not enter the land that God has promised him because of what he did with Moses at the rock of Meribah. But also here in my Life Application Bible, it infers that perhaps also Aaron is dying as a punishment for what he did in Exodus, which is where he built the golden calf for the people. And I always thought that was crazy in that book, where he built a golden calf and yet he was not punished. I was like, what? But he's the guy who built it. And then everyone else was punished. I was like, what? Maybe this is also a punishment for that. It does not say that explicitly, but I guess you can read that in there. I just wanted to point that out because I think in my video that I made on Exodus, I really was kind of frustrated with the fact that Aaron was not punished when he really should have been. Now we're in Numbers chapter 21, and we are specifically talking about verses 4 through 9. I really want to talk about this passage, and also I want to read what my Life Application Bible has to say about the passage. It's really, really cool. They traveled from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go around Edom. But the people grew impatient on the way. They spoke against God and against Moses and said, "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the desert? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food." Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us." So Moses prayed for the people. The Lord said to Moses, "Make a snake and put it on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live." So Moses made a bronze snake and put it up on a pole. Then, when anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the bronze snake, he lived. First of all, I'd just like to say, pretty cool. Now let's read from the Life Application footnotes. When the bronze snake was hung on the pole, the Israelites didn't know the fuller meaning Jesus Christ would bring to this event. Jesus explained that just as the Israelites were healed of their sickness by looking at the snake on the pole, all believers today can be saved from their sickness of sin by looking to Jesus' death on the cross. It was not the snake that healed the people, but their belief that God could heal them. This belief was demonstrated by their obedience to God's instructions. In the same way, we should continue to look to Christ. Yeah, I just had to point out how cool that was. Yeah, I really do believe that the Life Application footnotes interpretation of the verse is correct. Like it makes a whole lot of sense, and it's really, really cool. It's just really cool with all the symbolism and the parallelism. It's magical. Now, I'd also like to discuss chapter 22 real quick. It's a very long chapter, but this has to do with Balaam, the sorcerer. And I don't know, it's a very interesting chapter. Well, very confusing at points. At certain points, it seems like God tells Balaam to do something, and then Balaam does it, and then God's mad at him for it. But I don't think I'm correct about that. I don't know, this Life Application Bible is really helpful in some ways because the footnotes add clarifications. It's just some of the ways the Bible is written is very unclear. And this chapter is unclear at times. It's also a really powerful chapter because it shows how God can use somebody who is not necessarily like a good guy to do good things. Even though he condemns sorcery, he still uses Balaam, who is a sorcerer, for his purposes to protect the Israelites. Now Balaam later is found out to have also been doing some mischievous things with the Israelites, but that's another matter. And to go along with that chapter, I've got to say in chapter 24, verses 17 to 19, you could read this as a Balaam prophesying that Jesus is coming. And I'm just going to read this and see what you think. "I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. We will crush the foreheads of Moab, the skulls of all the sons of Sheth. Edom will be conquered. Seir, his enemy, will be conquered, but Israel will grow strong. A ruler will come out of Jacob and destroy the survivors of the city." Many believe that this is a prophecy of Jesus coming. The whole star come out of Jacob, the scepter will rise out of Israel, the Messiah. This is pointed to as one of the prophecies of the coming Messiah. Now we come to the most problematic of all the passages in the book of Numbers. This is coming from Numbers chapter 31, and this is verses 9 through 18. I'm going to read the whole passage because I think it's important to read it. Again, anyone out there who can explain to me how this is not kind of messed up, please explain that to me in the comment section. But from my perspective, it seems like a messed up thing. Has to do with women. "The Israelites captured the Midianite women and children and took all the Midianite herds, flocks, and goods as plunder. They burned all the towns where the Midianites had settled as well as all their camps. They took all the plunder and spoils, including the people and animals, and brought the captives, spoils, and plunder to Moses and Eleazar the priest and the Israelite assembly at their camp on the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. Moses, Eleazar the priest, and all the leaders of the community went to meet them outside the camp. Moses was angry with the officers of the army, the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, who returned from the battle. 'Have you allowed all the women to live?' he asked them. They were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and were the means of turning the Israelites away from the Lord in what happened at Peor, so that a plague struck the Lord's people. Now kill all the boys, and kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but it seems like this verse is saying, kill all the women who, committed, led Israelites astray. Save for yourselves the women that didn't sleep or who have never slept with a man, so that you can probably eventually have sex with them, and kill all the boys, as in killing the children. That's what it seems like this verse is saying to me. I don't like how, people are considered plunder, and I get, what are you gonna do in medieval society when you rout a whole, oppositional force and you've got the women and children. You can't just turn them out on their own, so you kind of do have to take them in under your wing. But I don't know, the Bible's very unclear as to what it means by how are these people treated? I don't know. Maybe I'm out of my depth. I just explain, anyone out there who's smarter than me and knows this better than me. And ladies and gentlemen, the last passage I would like to talk about in the book of Numbers is Numbers chapter 35, verses 6 through 34. I really, really like this passage, and I think it's a very interesting passage to bring up because basically, it's a long passage, so I'm not going to read it, but basically it's saying if a man accidentally kills someone, you need to provide a place for that man to be safe so that there can be a trial, and if it's found that he in fact committed an accidental murder, an accidental killing, he can be acquitted and be okay. And it also implies if the person didn't, if the person did commit intentional murder, then they can also be tried. And basically it's just saying that there's a place for people who have been cities, for people who have been accused of crimes that they either accidentally or intentionally committed. And I think that's a really good concept. I mean, it's almost like the concept of what we have today with jails and everything. Temporary holding, I guess. So anyways, ladies and gentlemen, those are my thoughts on the book of Numbers. If you haven't read it, highly recommend that you do read it. It's very interesting, very thought-provoking. And if you have read it, then please let me know what you thought of it. Please leave any comments, questions, whatever you gotta say in the comment section below of this video. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, if you liked this video, please like it and subscribe, tell your friends about the channel. And never forget to